What happens if you're a basketball player who can't shoot? Not just bad at shooting, but completely unreliable when it matters most. No jumper, no range, and when the game slows down, you can't even make free throws. That's the kind of flaw that usually ends careers before they even begin. So logically, a player like that shouldn't survive in the NBA, and definitely shouldn't dominate it. But somehow one player broke that rule completely. His name is Shaquille O'Neal, and what he did in the league doesn't just feel rare, it feels impossible. Because while the rest of basketball evolved towards skill, shooting, and finesse, Shaq built his career doing the exact opposite. He made just one three-pointer in 19 years, and from the free throw line to the most basic shot in the game, he missed over 5,000 attempts.
AC Green out now for the Lakers. Robert Horry in. That one was
difficult to get back, and Kobe's game is based on speed, quickness, and slashing.
Especially the last round against Portland comes in. And another.
His arms up to the basket, and that's what you have to do. You have to make him shoot free throws.
That's not just a weakness, that's something teams can exploit, something coaches can build entire strategies around. And they did. Opponents would intentionally foul him, forcing him into the one area where he couldn't be trusted, and sometimes it worked so well it cost his own team games. That weakness didn't just affect the scoreboard, it started to affect relationships. Because when you're a superstar, expectations are different. People don't just expect dominance, they expect reliability, and when Shaq couldn't deliver in those controlled moments, frustration started to build inside his own team. Even Kobe Bryant, one of the most competitive players the league has ever seen, began to question him. Not his talent, not his power, but his discipline. Because how do you trust a player who could dominate for 47 minutes, but become vulnerable in the final moments? That contradiction is what makes Shaq's story so fascinating. Because despite that flaw, despite all the doubt, he still managed to win 4 NBA championships, 3 finals MVPs, and become one of the highest scorers in league history. It doesn't make sense on paper, and that's exactly why this story matters. Because Shaq didn't win by fixing his weakness, he won by becoming so dominant everywhere else that his weakness couldn't stop him. But that version of Shaq didn't exist from the beginning. Before the championships, before the dominance, before the fear he put into defenders, there was a kid who didn't feel like he belonged anywhere. A kid who was different in a way that made life harder, not easier. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born on March 6, 1972, in Newark, New Jersey, and from the very start, he stood out. Not because of talent, not because of skill, but because of size. He was bigger than everyone else his age, almost twice the size of other kids, and instead of giving him confidence, it made him feel isolated. He couldn't fit in socially, couldn't relate to others, and that disconnect slowly turned into self-doubt. And on top of that, his biological father wasn't present, leaving a gap in his life where guidance should have been. Growing up in Newark during that time meant being surrounded by crime and limited opportunities, and for a while it felt like Shaq was heading down the same path as everyone else around him. Everything changed when his mother met Sergeant Philip Harrison. This wasn't just a new father figure, this was structure entering his life. Harrison brought discipline, accountability, and a level of expectation that Shaq had never experienced before. He didn't just see Shaq as a kid who was different, he saw potential that needed to be shaped. He raised him with purpose, pushing him to improve, holding him accountable, and making sure he didn't fall into the same traps that surrounded him. And then one moment changed everything. One Christmas, instead of buying toys or gifts, Harrison made a decision that would unknowingly define Shaq's future. He bought 2 tickets to a game at Madison Square Garden, New York Knicks versus Philadelphia 76ers. At the time, it seemed like a simple outing, but for Shaq, it would become the moment that set everything in motion. That night, Shaq experienced something completely new. The lights, the crowd, the energy, it was unlike anything he had ever seen. And then came the moment that changed everything. Julius Erving took off, gliding through the air with a level of grace and control that didn't even look real. The crowd erupted, and for the first time, Shaq felt what that stage could be like. It wasn't just a game anymore, it was something bigger, something powerful, something that pulled him in instantly. Right there, sitting in the stands, something clicked. Not slowly, not over time, but instantly. He turned to his father and said, "I want to be an NBA player." Most kids say things like that, and most of the time it fades away. But this time was different because of how his father responded. Instead of dismissing it, instead of telling him to be realistic, Harrison looked at Shaq and said something that would stay with him forever. "I'm going to make you the most dominant big man of all time. Not good, not successful, dominant." At the time, that sounded impossible, especially because Shaq couldn't even dunk yet. The same player who would go on to break backboards and overpower entire teams couldn't get the ball over the rim. And soon, things got even harder. In 1982, his family moved to a military base in Germany, forcing Shaq to start over once again. New country, new environment, no friends, no familiarity. To him, it felt like he was losing everything. But in reality, this move was positioning him for what came next. because a few years later an opportunity would appear that would quietly change the direction of his life. That opportunity came in the form of a basketball camp run by Dale Brown. And surprisingly, Shaq didn't even make the team. He got cut. For most people, that would have been the end of the dream, proof that they weren't good enough. But Shaq didn't have that option because his father didn't allow it. He forced him to stay, to watch, to learn.
He knows he wants to get better, and that comes from home, when his dad will say, well, he's a fairly good athlete. They're not all hung up on, he's the greatest. Once you start imagining things, and if you're not quite there, then you cut off your potential. What you see is exactly what you get, and that's honesty and integrity. And I think that this family should be held up as a beacon light for a lot of people. There's no price on their head. For the young children that may watch your show that think everybody gets a Rolls Royce and a gold chain and a slush fund, if the greatest, what they say is going to be the greatest player to play the game at this spot, didn't have to take it, they don't have to take it. So I admire him greatly.
And to understand the game instead of walking away from it. And after the camp, Shaq walked up to Coach Brown and asked a simple question: how can I jump higher? It sounds like a small moment, but it changed everything. Because Brown thought Shaq was a grown man, that's how big he looked. So when Shaq told him he was only 13, everything shifted. Brown saw potential, not just size, and from that moment on, he made it his mission to help develop him. But even with all that support, all that guidance, there was still one problem. Shaq still couldn't dunk, and that's where the real transformation was about to begin. By the time Shaq reached high school, everything should have been coming together. He had the size, the strength, and now the guidance. But the truth was, he still hadn't figured out who he was as a player. When his family moved again, this time to San Antonio, it forced another reset. New school, new environment, new expectations. At Robert G. Cole High School, Shaq finally made the varsity team, and physically he stood out immediately. He was bigger, stronger, and more imposing than everyone else on the court. But despite all of that, he wasn't dominating the way people expected. There was hesitation in his game, moments where he looked unsure of himself, almost like he was trying to play someone else's style instead of his own. He admired players like Julius Erving, and you could see it in the way he moved, trying to be smooth, trying to be flashy, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't built for him. And that disconnect between who he was and who he was trying to be was holding him back. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a regular season game, Shaq drove to the basket with force, the kind of drive that should have been unstoppable, and somehow he missed an easy layup. It wasn't just a mistake, it was the kind of moment that exposes doubt. And what happened next shocked everyone in the gym. His father, Sergeant Harrison, didn't stay in the stands. He walked straight onto the court, stopped the game, and forced Shaq to call a timeout. He pulled him outside and said something that would define the rest of his career. He told him to stop trying to be someone else. Stop trying to play like Dr. J. Stop trying to move like guards. Be Shaquille O'Neal. That message hit differently. It wasn't about skill, it wasn't about mechanics. It was about identity. And in that moment, something inside Shaq shifted. When Shaq walked back onto the court, he wasn't the same player. The hesitation was gone. The confusion disappeared. What replaced it was anger, focus, and clarity. The next time he attacked the rim, he didn't go for a soft finish. He exploded toward the basket and dunked with force. Not just to score, but to make a statement. And from that moment on, everything changed. Players stopped challenging him the same way. They started moving out of his path, giving him space, avoiding contact. Because Shaq wasn't just playing basketball anymore, he was imposing himself physically and mentally. That was the moment he stopped trying to fit into the game and started forcing the game to adjust to him. And once that switch flipped, there was no going back. But even as his dominance started to grow, there was still a weakness that hadn't gone anywhere. It was quiet, almost hidden, but it was there. And it showed up at the worst possible time. In a regional final game with everything on the line, Shaq had a chance to tie the game from the free throw line. 2 shots, a simple opportunity, the kind of moment where players prove who they are, and he missed both. Just like that, the game was over, and his team was eliminated. All that power, all that dominance, and it came down to the one area he couldn't control. That moment didn't just hurt, it stayed with him. It exposed something deeper, something that would follow him for the rest of his career. Because no matter how dominant he became, that weakness never fully disappeared. But instead of breaking him, it fueled him. Shaq made a promise to himself in that moment that he would never let his team down like that again. And the following season, he came back different, more focused, more aggressive, more determined. He led his team to a perfect 35-0 record, dominating opponents with a level of intensity that felt completely new. When they faced the same team that had eliminated them the year before, Shaq didn't hesitate. He attacked from the opening tip, controlling the game, scoring 44 points, and making sure there was no doubt this time. And when they reached the state championship, he didn't just dominate offensively. He controlled the defensive end as well, blocking shots, protecting the rim, and leading his team to a title. He had taken failure and turned it into fuel, and that mindset was becoming his biggest weapon. By the the time Shaq finished high school, it was clear he wasn't just a physically gifted player anymore. He was becoming a force. Colleges across the country wanted him, offering opportunities that once seemed impossible. But his decision had already been made long before he became a national name. He stayed loyal to Dale Brown, the coach who believed in him when no one else did. That loyalty would take him to LSU, where the game would get faster, stronger, and far more unforgiving. And for the first time, Shaq would face a new kind of challenge. Not just physical competition, but pressure, expectations, and opponents who were smart enough to attack his weaknesses. Because at the next level, it wasn't enough to be dominant. You had to be complete. And Shaq was about to learn that the hard way. When Shaq arrived at LSU, everything changed again. High school dominance didn't mean anything anymore. This was a different level, faster, stronger, smarter. And for the first time in years, Shaq wasn't the clear #1 option. The team already had talent, including a guard many compared to a young Stephen Curry in terms of scoring ability, along with another dominant big man competing for the same position. For Shaq, this was unfamiliar territory. He had gone from being the most dominant player on the court to fighting for his role. And that shift created tension, not just with teammates, but within himself. Because now, it wasn't just about proving he was good. It was about proving he belonged, and early on it wasn't clear if he truly did. During his freshman season, Shaq didn't start. He came off the bench watching another center take the spotlight he believed he could own. But even in limited minutes, something started to show. He averaged nearly 14 points, grabbed rebounds at an elite level, and blocked shots in a way that made people take notice. There was something different about him. Something raw, something powerful, something that couldn't be ignored. And then everything shifted. When the starting center became academically ineligible, Shaq was given the opportunity he had been waiting for. And he didn't just step into the role, he took it over completely. Over the next 2 seasons, he transformed into one of the most dominant players in college basketball, averaging over 25 points, 14 rebounds, and more than 5 blocks per game. He wasn't just playing well, he was overwhelming opponents. But as his dominance grew, so did the attention on his weakness. Because at the college level, teams don't just react, they adjust. And they quickly realized something. If you couldn't stop Shaq from scoring, you could still control him. You could foul him, send him to the free throw line, force him into the one situation where his dominance disappeared. And it worked. Shaq shot just around 57% from the line at LSU. That meant every time he got fouled, there was a real chance he would leave points on the board. And in the close games, that mattered a lot. It changed strategies, it changed outcomes, and it introduced a concept that would follow him for the rest of his career. You didn't have to stop Shaq, you just had to exploit him. That flaw became impossible to ignore during March Madness, the biggest stage in college basketball. The moment where legacies are built. And despite Shaq's individual brilliance, LSU struggled to go deep in the tournament. They never made it past the second round during his time there. Not because Shaq wasn't dominant, but because when the game slowed down, when every possession mattered, teams forced the ball out of his hands and put him at the line. And suddenly, the most dominant player on the court became uncertain. That contrast started to affect him mentally because for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about what he could do. He was thinking about what he couldn't, and that doubt began to grow. At night, Shaq would lie awake thinking about his future, thinking about the NBA, wondering if he was really good enough. Because when he compared himself to players like Christian Leitner, he saw something he didn't have: a jump shot, ball handling, versatility. Leitner looked complete, polished, ready, and Shaq didn't. In his mind, he wasn't the obvious #1 pick. He was a dominant player with a major flaw. But while Shaq doubted himself, the NBA saw something completely different. Teams weren't focused on what he couldn't do. They were focused on what nobody else could do. His size, his power, his presence, things you couldn't teach, things you couldn't stop. As the 1992 NBA draft approached, every lottery team prepared for one possibility: getting Shaq.
With the first pick in the 1992 NBA draft, the Orlando Magic selects Shaquille O'Neal from Louisiana State University.
And your first thing was, who, me, #1? Obviously, drafting you #1 is a foregone conclusion, but what are the prospects of you signing early or the prospects of you sitting out a year?
Well, patience is the best virtue, and we're going to Orlando tomorrow, and we're going to start the negotiations, and we're just going to take our time. And, as I said before, patience is the best virtue, and we're just going to take our time.
Jerseys with his name were ready before the draft even started. Because if you got the first pick, there was no decision to make. And when the lottery came down to the final 2 teams, everything was on the line: the Charlotte Hornets and the Orlando Magic. When the results were announced, Charlotte got the second pick, which meant Orlando had just secured the future. And a few weeks later, it became official. With the first pick in the 1992 NBA draft, the Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal.
The first selection in the 1992 NBA draft will be made by the Orlando Magic, who have 5 minutes to make that selection.
5 minutes from now, Orlando almost certainly will pick Shaquille O'Neal.
Obviously, the grand prize in this draft is Shaquille O'Neal. Those rights do belong to the Orlando Magic with the #1 pick.
The Orlando Magic selects Shaquille O'Neal.
Just like that, the kid who once couldn't dunk, who got cut from a team, who doubted himself, was now the #1 pick in the NBA. But what nobody knew yet was this: the real challenge was just beginning. From the moment Shaq stepped into the NBA, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal rookie story. Most players take time to adjust, to understand the pace, the physicality, the pressure of playing against grown men. But Shaquille O'Neal didn't ease into the league, he stormed into it. In his first 5 games with the Orlando Magic, he averaged over 25 points, 16 rebounds, and more than 3 blocks per game. Numbers that didn't just stand out for a rookie, they shocked the entire league. He was named Player of the Week in his very first week, something that had never been done before. It felt like the NBA had been introduced to a force it wasn't ready for. Shaq wasn't just competing, he was overwhelming players who had been in the league for years, and for a moment, it looked like nothing could stop him. But the league adjusts fast, and it didn't take long for teams to figure out the same thing college teams had already discovered. You couldn't stop Shaq in the paint, but you could control him at the free throw line. And that strategy showed up clearly in one specific game against the Phoenix Suns. Late in the game, with everything on the line, the Suns made a decision. Don't let Shaq score. Foul him. Send him to the line. Force him into the one situation where he wasn't dominant. And it worked. Shaq missed key free throws, and Orlando lost a game they should have won. It wasn't just a single loss, it was a blueprint, a strategy the entire league could now use. And by the end of the season, those missed opportunities added up. The Magic missed the playoffs by just a few games, and Shaq's biggest weakness had already started shaping his career at the highest level. But sometimes failure creates opportunity, and that's exactly what happened next. During the offseason, Shaq stepped into a completely different environment. Not a basketball court, but a movie set. While filming the movie Blue Chips, he met a young player named Penny Hardaway, and that meeting would change everything. The two built a strong connection quickly, not just as players, but as people. They understood each other's game, their personalities matched, and more importantly, they saw what they could become together. Shaq didn't just see Penny as another player, he saw him as the missing piece. So when the 1993 NBA draft approached, Shaq made it clear to Orlando: draft him. But there was a problem. Penny was expected to be picked in the top 5, and Orlando wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that position. And then something unbelievable happened. Despite having almost no chance, the Orlando Magic won the draft lottery again. Back-to-back #1 picks. It didn't make sense, but it gave them power, and they used it. They selected Chris Webber with the first pick, not because they wanted him, but because they knew they could trade him. And shortly after, they made the move that would define their future. They traded Webber for Penny Hardaway and additional picks. Just like that, Shaq got what he wanted: a dynamic partner, a player who could complement his dominance perfectly. And together they transformed Orlando. What was once a struggling team suddenly became one of the most exciting teams in the league. Fast, powerful, unpredictable, and for the first time, it felt like Shaq wasn't just a dominant player, he was part of something bigger. That transformation showed immediately in the 1993 to 94 season. Shaq wasn't just dominating individually anymore, he was leading a team. He dropped 53 points in a single game, recorded one of the rarest stat lines ever with a triple-double that included 15 blocks, and forced defenses to collapse every time he touched the ball. And when defenses collapsed, it opened everything up for his teammates. Orlando won 50 games that season, a massive jump from where they had been before. They entered the playoffs for the first time, and expectations started to rise. But the playoffs are different. They expose everything, and once again, Shaq's weakness showed up at the worst possible moment. In Game 1 against the Indiana Pacers, he missed key free throws and failed to secure a crucial rebound in the final seconds, allowing Indiana to win by a single point. That moment shifted the entire series. Instead of building confidence, Orlando started to unravel. Shaq struggled with foul trouble, missed opportunities, and inconsistency at the free throw line. The Pacers took advantage, and just like that, the Magic were swept out of the playoffs. It was a harsh reminder that dominance alone wasn't enough, that something was still missing. But instead of breaking the team, it fueled them. Because the very next season, Orlando came back stronger. They added key veterans like Horace Grant, bringing championship experience into a young team, and Shaq took another step forward, winning the scoring title and establishing himself as one of the best players in the league. Orlando didn't just improve, they became the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And this time, they were ready. Their playoff run was different: confident, aggressive, focused. They defeated the Boston Celtics, then faced their biggest challenge yet, a team that had just changed everything with 2 simple words: "I'm back." Michael Jordan had returned, and suddenly the path to the finals wasn't just about winning, it was about proving something. Could Shaq really lead a team past Jordan? Could a player with such a glaring weakness overcome the greatest competitor in basketball history? The series went back and forth, but something unexpected happened. For once, the strategy against Shaq didn't work. He made his free throws. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to win. And just like that, Orlando eliminated Chicago, sending a message to the entire league. This wasn't just potential anymore, this was real. Reaching the NBA Finals should have been the moment everything came together. For Shaquille O'Neal, it felt like confirmation that he had arrived. The Orlando Magic were young, confident, and coming off a huge win over Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. They believed this was their time, and early in Game 1 against the Houston Rockets, it looked like they were right. Orlando built a massive lead, controlling the pace, dictating the game, and putting pressure on the defending champions. Everything was going according to plan. But what they didn't fully understand yet was this: the finals are different. Experience matters, composure matters, and on the other side stood a player who had both. That player was Hakeem Olajuwon, and what happened next wasn't just a loss, it was a lesson. Houston slowly chipped away at the lead, possession by possession, never rushing, never panicking. And when the game reached its final moments, Orlando had a chance to close it out. One free throw would have sealed Game 1. One shot, but that's where everything collapsed. Nick Anderson stepped to the line and missed, not once, but multiple times.
In fourth quarters. Today, though, Orlando 12 of 15 at the line. And Anderson missing on both.
Team anyway, they were going to do it by committee, and another miss by Nick Anderson.
Make 4 rule. That's in effect, I believe, yes. And he misses 4 straight.
The door stayed open and Houston took advantage. Kenny Smith hit a clutch three-pointer to force overtime, and from that point on, the momentum was gone. The Rockets took control and Orlando never recovered. That one moment didn't just cost them a game, it shifted the entire series. From that point forward, the finals became a completely different story. Hakeem didn't just play well, he dominated. He outmaneuvered Shaq, outthought him, and exposed the difference between raw power and refined skill. Every move felt calculated, every possession controlled, and for the first time in his career, Shaq looked human. Not because he lacked ability, but because he gave too much respect. Years later, he would admit it himself. He treated Hakeem like an idol instead of an opponent, and in the finals, that mindset is dangerous. Houston swept Orlando, winning 4 straight games and securing back-to-back championships. Just like that, the dream turned into reality, but not the kind Shaq wanted. Instead of lifting the trophy, he was left watching someone else do it. That loss changed him. Not immediately, but deeply, because for the first time, Shaq understood something he hadn't fully accepted before. Dominance wasn't enough. Talent wasn't enough. There were levels to this game and he hadn't reached the top yet. But as important as that lesson was, what happened next might have been even more impactful. Because instead of building on that finals run, everything in Orlando started to fall apart. Injuries slowed Shaq down early in the next season. Personal loss hit him when his grandmother passed away, and tensions within the organization started to rise. A moment that should have brought the team together instead created distance. The situation reached a breaking point during contract negotiations. Shaq expected to be valued as the franchise player, the one who carried the team to the finals, but Orlando saw things differently. They prioritized Penny Hardaway, making it clear that Shaq wouldn't be the highest paid player on the team. Then things got worse. A local newspaper ran a poll asking fans if Shaq was worth the money he was asking for. Over 90% said no. Think about that. The player who just took the franchise to its first finals appearance was being questioned by the very people he helped elevate. That wasn't just disrespect, that was a signal. And Shaq heard it clearly. He wasn't wanted the way he thought he was. So when the opportunity came, he didn't hesitate. In 1996, the Los Angeles Lakers, led by general manager Jerry West, made a move that would change NBA history. They created the cap space, made the calls, and offered Shaq a massive contract. But that wasn't the only move. West had also just acquired a young guard with incredible potential. His name was Kobe Bryant. At the time, no one fully understood what that pairing would become. 2 completely different personalities, 2 dominant mindsets, 2 players who both believed they should be the center of everything. It wasn't just a partnership, it was a collision waiting to happen. But before the conflict, there was a bigger question. Could this combination actually win? The early years in Los Angeles didn't answer that question immediately. There were flashes of greatness, moments where it looked like they could dominate the league, but they kept falling short. Playoff exits, missed opportunities, growing tension between Shaq and Kobe. It became clear that talent alone wasn't enough. Something was missing. Leadership, structure, a system that could control 2 players who both wanted to lead. And that's when the Lakers made the move that would change everything. They brought in a coach who had already proven he could manage greatness. A coach who had handled egos, built dynasties, and understood how to turn talent into championships. His name was Phil Jackson, and with his arrival, everything was about to change. When Phil Jackson arrived in Los Angeles, everything changed almost immediately. This wasn't just a coaching hire, it was a system being installed. A system built on discipline, structure, and most importantly, balance. Because for the first time, someone had to control two forces that were both used to leading. Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant weren't just teammates, they were competitors sharing the same space. And if that wasn't managed properly, it would fall apart. Phil understood that. So instead of choosing one over the other, he built the system around Shaq, making him the centerpiece of the offense while pushing Kobe to grow within it. It wasn't easy and it wasn't smooth, but it worked. Because once roles were defined, everything started to click. The 1999 to 2000 season became the turning point. Shaq entered the year in the best shape of his career, fully locked in, fully focused, and ready to prove something. And what followed was one of the most dominant individual seasons the league had ever seen. He averaged nearly 30 points, 14 rebounds, and controlled every game he stepped into. He dropped 61 points on his birthday, won the MVP award, and made it clear that he wasn't just a great player, he was the most dominant force in basketball. But this time, it wasn't just about him. The team around him was finally working as a unit. Kobe was evolving, learning when to take over and when to trust the system, and together they turned potential into reality. That playoff run felt different from anything before. There was confidence, but also urgency. Sacramento, Phoenix, Portland, one by one, teams tried to slow them down, and one by one, they failed. But the defining moment came in Game 7 against Portland. Down by 15 in the fourth quarter, everything was slipping away. This was the kind of moment where past failures could return, where doubt could creep in. But this time, it didn't. The Lakers fought back possession by possession, and then came the play that defined their partnership. Kobe drove, elevated, and threw a perfect lob. Shaq caught it mid-air and slammed it down. That moment wasn't just a highlight, it was a statement. They had figured it out. And shortly after they closed the game, reached the finals, and Shaq delivered one of the most dominant finals performances ever, securing his first championship and finals MVP. But once you win once, expectations change. Now it wasn't about proving they could win, it was about how long they could stay on top. And the answer came quickly. The Lakers repeated. Then they did it again. 3 straight championships. A dynasty. Shaq dominated every finals he played in, winning 3 consecutive finals MVPs and proving that when locked in, there was no one who could stop him. But behind that success, tension was building again. Kobe was improving rapidly, becoming one of the best players in the league, and he didn't want to stay in anyone's shadow. Shaq, on the other hand, believed the system still ran through him. That conflict never fully disappeared, even during the championships, and eventually it reached a breaking point. After the 2004 finals loss to Detroit, the Lakers made a decision. They chose Kobe, and just like that, the partnership that built a dynasty came to an end. Shaq was traded to the Miami Heat, and once again, he had something to prove. Not to the league, not to fans, but to himself. Because now the question was different. Could he win without Kobe? Could he lead again? And in Miami, alongside Dwyane Wade, he found a new role. This time, he didn't have to be the only force. He adapted, supported, and trusted the system. And in 2006, after falling behind in the finals, Miami came back and won the championship. Shaq had done it again, proving that his success wasn't tied to one team or one player, it was tied to who he had become. By the time his career ended, Shaq's legacy was already secured. 4 NBA championships, 3 finals MVPs, 1 MVP, and still one of the top scorers in NBA history. All of that while missing over 5,000 free throws and making just 1 three-pointer. A career that shouldn't have worked, but did, because Shaq didn't follow the rules of what a great player should be. He redefined them. He turned his strength into something so overwhelming that his weaknesses couldn't stop him. And in doing that, he didn't just become one of the greatest players ever. He became one of the most unique. Because in a game that values skill and precision, Shaquille O'Neal proved that dominance, when pushed to its absolute limit, can be just as unstoppable. And maybe that's the most important part of his story. It's not about perfection. It's not about having a complete game. It's about understanding what makes you different and pushing it so far that nothing else matters. Shaq never became a great shooter. He never fixed his biggest flaw, but he didn't need to, because he became something the game had never seen before. And that's why even today his story doesn't feel normal. It feels impossible. And yet, somehow he made it real. If you made it this far, you already know. Shaq didn't become great by being perfect. He became great by being unstoppable. And that's what NBA Echoes is all about. Real stories, real journeys, and the moments that define legends. So if you're into this kind of storytelling, hit subscribe and stay locked in, because the next story might be even crazier.